Okay, just keeping an eye on the participant list. And we got some people joining already. So welcome everybody. We're going to get started in just a few moments. Wait for some people to filter in. But thank you very much for joining us today. And I can see some more people joining. Welcome everybody. Get started in about 30 seconds, okay? Couple more. All right, I think we can begin. So yes, welcome everybody to part 2 of this DevRec webinar series entitled Tech Recruitment Unveiled, Secrets to Successful Hiring. Now we've got a very exciting discussion planned for you guys today. But before we get started, I've got a couple of quick housekeeping things I want to get through. So number one, please send in your questions. We will be saving time for an open Q&A session at the end of today's discussion. But also, if you've got some questions throughout the webinar, you can fire them into the chat box or the Q&A, and maybe our panelists can get to them by typing them throughout the response. Otherwise, we'll get to them at the end. Second of all, this webinar is being recorded. So if you can't make it to the end of the webinar, if you want to share it with your colleagues, you'll get the link to the recording a couple of hours after the webinar concludes today. And yeah, last but not least, straight after the webinar finishes, we will be sending you guys a post-webinar survey. So we'd really appreciate it if you guys took the time to fill that in. You can let us know how we went today. And you can also suggest some topics that you'd like to see us cover in future webinars and events. So yeah, please take the time. Yeah, so now that boring stuff is out of the way, I think it might be a great opportunity to introduce our panelists. We'll kind of go from left to right. I think that makes the most sense. So Jakub Kupulinski, DevSkiller CEO, thanks very much for joining us. Can you give us some words about yourself?
Hi. So I'm a DevSkiller CEO, as Justin mentioned. I have an engineering background, and I've spent a big part of my professional life on recruiting. I've conducted over 1,000 technical interviews, probably a few hundred like non-technical interviews. So I really know the pain, and I know the subject, as that's what I was getting paid for many, many years. So yeah, it's great to be there.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. All right, Gavin, thanks very much for agreeing to take part. This is your first webinar with us, so thanks for taking the time. Can you give us a few words about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So yeah, I'm Gavin Hope. I'm a software engineering manager at Waters Corporation. I've been working in the software development industry for around 20 years. That's been a mix of individual contributor roles. I've spent a lot of time as a software engineer, but also management roles too. The last 5 years, I've been an engineering manager at Waters. A lot of the emphasis there is on building good software teams. That obviously involves recruitment. Think about the environment that the team and the people are working in, and also like developing people. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we're going to really dig deep into the recruitment element of all of you guys' jobs. But yeah, thanks for that, Gavin. And Tomek, last but not least, kind of a regular these days on DevSkiller webinars. So thanks for joining us again. Can you give us a few words about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. So I'm Tomek Nurkiewicz. I'm a CTO at DevSkiller. I'm partly software engineer and partly a manager, so to speak. And I have quite a long story of recruiting, both in like really large corporations and large scale hiring processes and at startups. So I know all the pains and all the friction between developers who are doing the development, the recruitment, and the recruiters who are trying to gather the best people they can. But both of these are kind of on the two sides of the same process, and that's kind of that's what really makes me sad, and that's what we would like to talk about today.
Yeah, which we certainly will. Yeah, so thanks very much, guys, for those introductions. Before we get started, for those of you who weren't present during part 1 of this series, you might be wondering what the concept of DevRec is, basically. So yeah, in a few words, what is DevRec all about? DevRec is a 3-part webinar series focusing on successful HR and IT cooperation for tech recruitment. During part 1, we were joined by a panel of HR professionals, talent acquisition specialists, technical recruiters, people of this nature to give their side of the story, the HR perspective of the story. Today, during part 2, we'll hear the perspective of the IT hiring managers. So we've just heard from our panelists, all who've got experience in IT and recruitment. So we're going to really deep dive and focus on the role of IT in the recruitment process. So we've got a lot to unpack today, and I am going to stop sharing this and get started with our questions. But before I do that, I am going to launch a quick poll. And we've got a few polls today. And some of them are pretty straightforward, basically like this one, which I'm about to launch. The other ones we're going to use actually to structure the content that we've got planned for the day. So yes, you should see this poll appearing on your screen right now. It's a very straightforward question. Which department do you work for? HR, IT, or other? And we want to know the answer to this question basically so we can structure our content accordingly. I think I allowed our panelists to vote as well, but I think I know the answer to all three already. But yeah,
I've chosen other, so.
Or other, and it's absolutely not a problem if there's other. Like, this is an interesting topic, I think, for many people involved in organizations. So I think we've got all the votes. So I'm going to end that poll and share the results. So yeah, we have a majority of the HR audience, but there are some votes for IT and other. I'm not sure if Kuba was other, but if he was, anyway. So yeah, I'm going to, so we get started with our discussion today. And basically, Gavin, I might start with you. You've given us a little bit of background about your experience and stuff like that, but I was curious to know where recruitment actually falls in your current scope of responsibilities, because, to give us a bit of an idea of, how much of your day or week that you're spending on in recruitment typically over at Waters.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the engineering manager role at Waters, hiring is one of the key responsibilities for that. So it's part of a job description effectively. There'll be periods of growth where we're making the team bigger to do more stuff. And you're also hiring for replacements as well. If somebody leaves, you need to backfill that spot. The growth periods, if you're hiring a team of 7 people, 8 people, that can be quite intense. You get a lot of hiring all in one go. If you don't have any growth, maybe in this annual budget, so for this year, we're not hiring a new team. Hopefully nobody leaves, maybe one person leaves. You might not do that much hiring during a given year. There are other things that kind of run in parallel with that. So for example, we've just offered to 3 students to do a summer intern program. So you got we interviewed 10 students in total for that. So there'll be other things, apprentices as well, that don't fit within the usual headcount. Over the last 3 to 4 years, there have been 2 periods of growth where we've hired a full another team, or the amount of people that would go into a team. So there've been a couple of really intense patches of hiring. So job description definitely, but kind of my personal view on the engineering manager role, it's to me hiring is a priority. This is one of the key steps in building a good software team. So when it comes to recruiting, you're balancing the needs of the team today, maybe whether it's skill need or a role need, but also you're balancing that against the future growth and the future makeup of your team. And if you get hiring wrong, it can be really costly. And I'm definitely in the camp of, if you're not sure, it's a no for a candidate. So keep the bar high, and it's a great way or one of the ways you can help to keep the best possible team.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting. It's a part of the job description, like you said, exactly, and even the idea of students being part of the recruitment process as well. This is obviously a really important tactic as well for many hiring managers. Tomek, I wondered maybe if you wanted to elaborate on this. You're responsible for building out the DevSkiller dev team, which is sort of constantly growing. What's your experience with this particular point?
Yeah, we are kind of in the recruitment space or in the recruitment industry, but we have a development team on our own, so we have to build that team as well. Yes, I totally agree that this is one of the most important parts in the kind of life cycle of the team when you are actually hiring, because these are the people which will form your team. So I'm obviously also involved in in recruiting. It's in a small company, it's much different than in a large company or like in a corporate environment. But anyways, it's still kind of part of my duties. And I would also say that it's one of the most important ones, because after all, like these people will, you will trust these people in the end. And these are the people which will kind of spawn new ideas and so on and so forth. So you have to make, you want to make sure that these are the best people. And I also agree with this saying that if you are not sure, if you're kind of on the fence, you should rather go for no, because like otherwise you are hurting yourself, your team, and that person, because that person with a goodwill switches jobs just to like leave your new company after like a few months. So overall, I'm still doing recruitment. I'm still like skimming through CVs, looking through homeworks, talking to people, examining their soft skills and so on and so forth, because that's also like extremely important part and something that's lacking in developers.
Yeah, I think you alluded to it in your earlier sort of introduction, that you're an engineer, a developer, but also a manager, and it seems to be that starts to sort of shift towards this managerial position as things go along. All right, thanks very much, guys, for that. Yeah, Kuba, moving along, we kind of have an understanding now of where recruitment falls in the scope of responsibilities, but obviously you founded DevSkiller and you were responsible for some of the very early hires of the company, and also extensive experience hiring developers previously to DevSkiller as well with Allegro and different companies. So I wanted to know if you could share some information about what of the types of roles that you've had the biggest experience in recruiting over the years, and maybe what's changed potentially throughout the years.
Yeah, so just before founding DevSkiller, I was responsible for setting a new development office for a large corporation. And I was basically spending like most of my time on interviews. And it was, there were weeks when I was spending like having like 40 or 50 interviews per week. So that was a disaster. And basically DevSkiller was founded based on this frustration that I was spending time with candidates that were often like wannabe developers, and like hiring software engineers, mostly senior software engineers, is where the most of my expertise is placed. Yeah, with DevSkiller and the early hires at DevSkiller, that was pretty easy, because being like a frequent conference speaker and like community member, it was pretty easy for me to build the core team at the beginning of the DevSkiller base, and the friends and then the people who I know and who I trust. So that was pretty easy, because most of the recruitment discussions were handled on a beer when we were discussing how cool it's work for a startup. So that was pretty easy. And right now, like Tomek is responsible for the next hires, and right now I'm hiring mostly like the experienced managers. So the C-level or director level people, which is totally different experience, especially for DevSkiller, because for us, like this recruitment process are pretty long, pretty detailed. It often takes like the whole day of working with the candidate, but there are not like hundreds of candidates. That's the short list when you have 2 or 3 people who you like to join your company. But yeah, definitely my most experience is in really large scale recruitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Gavin, maybe you can sort of extend on that point. You said that at Waters it kind of comes in waves. So you have sort of periods of heavy recruitment. So in those periods, like what are some of the roles that you typically hire for?
Yeah, sure. So after what Kuba said earlier, I was just looking at the numbers there. I think over the last 4 to 5 years, I've probably interviewed in a region of 70 to 100 software engineers and placed maybe between 15 and 20. So the vast majority of the recruitment is for the software engineer role. Second place would be software test engineers. We've hired some scientists, some product owners, but it's mostly software engineering. So if you break that down maybe into the different levels of experience and grade, a good mix between junior, mid, and senior levels. We have, I'd say I probably have less personal experience hiring for kind of staff plus engineer roles, so principals, staff engineers. So mostly experience in junior, mid, and senior software engineers.
Yeah, fueling growth, I guess, in these
Yep.
in these moments for sure. Okay, Tomek, I don't know if you have anything you want to add here, or can we move along?
Yeah, I guess we can move along. I mean, regarding my experience, it's like a similar spectrum, so to speak.
Sure. Okay. All right. So we do have a few polls lined up today. So we've already had our first one. We know that the majority of you have joined from sort of HR background, and it's for a good reason, because I'm going to launch the second poll here. I'll read it out and then explain it. And I'm also allowing our panelists to vote. So it should appear on your screen now. And the question is this: when it comes to cooperation with HR, which of the following do you believe causes IT professionals the most frustration during the recruitment process? And we have 6 options to choose from: lack of technical knowledge, inability to create a compelling job description, quality of source candidates, poorly screened candidates, too little time to review candidates, too many unnecessary interviews. And we're basically going to base the next chapter of this conversation on this. And this is your assumption on what you believe, or in your experience, that IT have with their frustration level. And if you're an IT professional yourself, you can vote, or if another, you can vote on this one as well, because we really want to get all of the answers are really valid at this point. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results and actually make a note of this. So yeah, we have a pretty resounding winner, which is lack of technical knowledge. But we also have votes for the second place, which was tied second place, inability to create a compelling job description and quality of source candidates. So we're going to unpack all of those, but yeah, we got votes for poorly screened candidates, too little time to review, and unnecessary interviews as well. So I'll stop sharing that poll, which shouldn't be on your screen anymore. And yeah, we want to kind of unpack these top 3 vote getters. So what we'll do here, panelists, is I'm going to assign one to each of you, but everybody can jump in and sort of answer. But what we want to do is kind of address the issue and see how, from your perspective as IT professionals, hiring managers, what can be done to improve upon this particular issue. So maybe I'll start with, who do we just finish with? Gavin. So I'll go with you, Tomek, first. You can take the first one, lack of technical knowledge. So in your opinion, what can be done to improve or address this issue, or is it even an issue in your belief at all?
Well, it is kind of an issue, although I wouldn't really blame the HR people for not having like too broad technical knowledge, because that's not the point. The HR people are not supposed to be as technically fluent as developers, because like we have developers for that. And it's not really even about this legendary Java versus JavaScript, and does it really make any difference, because that's kind of a running joke. But like to be a little bit constructive, what can we do about it? So the recruiters need to have a little bit of technical knowledge, just so that they understand what they are recruiting for. I cannot imagine a recruiter looking for, I don't know, a doctor or a driver or whatever, not knowing like what the anatomy, or not knowing how to drive or whatever. So in that case, I would expect the HR people to understand like the fundamentals. What is a programming language? What is this like jokingly quoted Java versus JavaScript difference? And why are they like totally different? What is cloud computing, and so on and so forth? Just like kind of understand the touch points, so that they know they don't make a silly mistake because the developers just roll their eyes and they go away because they're talking to someone who has absolutely no knowledge. And I do understand, when I am being recruited, I do understand that the recruiter is not technical. So it's actually very immature from the developer's perspective to expect the recruiter to be fluent in technology and to use like very technical language. And this is actually a big minus, a big disadvantage when we're looking at the developer, that the developer cannot speak the language of a recruiter. So that being said, so that's kind of a warning sign when you have a developer and the developer expects the recruiter to be very technical. The developer is going to talk to customers. The developer will talk to clients, users, and so on. And he or she should be capable of like avoiding technical mumbo jumbo. But coming back to the actual question, so how can we breach the actual gap so that recruiters aren't completely like blind in this area? So actually, you should look for recruiters who are keen to learn. And I'm not talking about people who will be like doing C# development overnight or whatever, but they should kind of be interested in this stuff at least. So if I'm looking for a front-end developer, what does it mean? Like, how are they working? What is an editor? What is JavaScript? What is a browser? And so on and so forth. And in order to bridge the gap, assuming you have people who are willing to learn a little bit, just have a workshop with recruiters. Just sit for even like half a day and prepare them some sort of a short list of not even technologies, not even acronyms, but like the main areas. So listen, this is IT, like the whole area. There's hardware, there's software. In case of hardware, we have servers, we have desktops, we have cloud. In terms of software, we have programming languages, we have operating systems. So let's make it some sort of a mind map where they can just navigate and stuff, and they will really, really appreciate it. Don't make it a lecture where you're explaining what are keywords in Ruby and what is the difference between compiled and interpreted language. They will never remember that, and it's just going to be boring, but let them kind of know where to, in which direction to go. And I would be thrilled to have such an introduction, because this would basically give me a 5 years worth of curriculum given to me in like a couple of hours. So at least I know when a candidate says that he is specialized in, I don't know, React, then at least the recruiter says, okay, React, it sounds like a JavaScript framework or a library. So I know where it runs, and I know what is kind of like goes together. And I know that React is somewhat similar to Angular because I can like more or less Google it. But that's it. And that's, by the way, how we also approach recruitment. You are supposed to Google stuff rather than know everything by heart. So long story short, just sit with your HR and make this initiative, like do a workshop, teach them a little bit, like tell them we are recruiting for this stuff, very bird's eye view, so that they have a rough understanding. Do not try to make them a second developer, because you are not going to be a second recruiter. You are not an HR person. They are not developers, but at least kind of try to level up the knowledge a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a funny situation regarding the Java versus JavaScript, because in fact, the first Java job I get like over 15 years ago was only because a recruiter misunderstood Java and JavaScript, and he sent me to a Java interview. Well, I have no idea about Java. However, the company decided to give me a chance, so I started learning Java just after the interview, and I was hired. So there can be like a good outcomes with that. But the second story I would bring, and I would elaborate a little bit on that. So I remember a situation when we've been hiring interns in the company, and there were one candidate who was like very, very poor. He was not able to answer any question, almost any question. And at the very end, we decided that we want to like make a positive, feeling. So we started asking some extra easy questions, like what's the difference between class and object? And the guy said, I'm not sure, I don't know. And then the woman from HR said, hey, even I know answer to this question. And why I'm talking about that? Because there is difference between what Tomek mentioned, like a technical knowledge and technical awareness. And we do not expect technical recruiters, not technical recruiters, that they have the technical knowledge, but they should have the technical awareness. And the good solution here is that you can get this technical awareness just by listening to these interviews, like this woman from HR said, I know the difference between object and class because it was asked many, many times. And the problem is that when you join as a recruiter, a company that hires mostly senior developers, then it's extremely hard for you to understand even the discussion between the tech leader and the candidate, because the level they are starting with is like extremely high. They are not talking about easy stuff. They are starting with like multi-threading, learning some resilience patterns, etc. But if you're a recruiter and you're joining at the early stage, mostly interviews with interns, then with juniors, then with mid developers, and then with seniors, then just by listening to like interviews and listening the same questions and the same answers, like for you know, like 100 hours or something like this, you are building this awareness. Of course, if you can use like your own the developers to like conduct this internal workshop, then it's great. But still, like being able to like go smoothly stage by stage to more advanced positions, it's something that is hugely beneficial for recruiters. So like being very like unexperienced recruiter and starting to join like senior interviews or interviews with senior people, especially if you are not like humble enough to say, hey, I don't have this technical awareness. Because that's the problem. Then sometimes you talk to recruiters and they're like, you know, trying to convince you that they know this stuff, and it's obvious that they have no idea what they are asking for. So that's like, be honest and like start going to interviews from like the less advanced to more advanced levels. So that's my suggestion to HR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, communication and resources. I mean, there's plenty of resources out there. Even on DevSkiller, we have an ebook, the glossary of technical terms, something as simple as that, just to be aware of different elements of the job. All right, Gavin, would you like to add anything here, or should we move on to the next one?
Just something brief. Like, so I agree with everything that was just said there, especially it comes down to collaboration, right? Helping your colleagues out and it being a two-way thing. But also just to kind of, if people feel that they're struggling with lack of technical knowledge, to like look at why that is and what we're trying to get out of that interaction. So is this a recruiter is in a one-to-one with a candidate? And if so, why do we need the technical knowledge in that? Is that the candidate's asking for knowledge about what does the company use? What will I be doing in the team? Like, because they're interested in learning about what the role is, or is it the other way around? Is the recruiter trying to find out information about the candidate? Because again, like helping out with those problems is different. Like, so we can provide really easy like crib sheets for somebody in recruitment to give a solid overview of this is the tech stack, and you can, this is the tech stack, here are all the words. I might not know what they are, but I can give you a good overview of the role. Whereas the other way, if you're trying to kind of assess the candidates in some way at an early stage, then maybe that's just an expectation that's kind of wrong. Like maybe we need a technical person to do that if we're looking for an early technical screen.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I think, there's some really good insights there, and I hope that really helped the audience. I'll move on to the next one. I'll start with you, Gavin, as well. And it's interesting that it was the option was inability to create a compelling job description. And it's interesting that was the second place vote getter. In the first part of this webinar series, we had a poll asking the different stages of the hiring process and which needs the most improvement for cooperation between HR and IT. And this won by a landslide, the job description. So it's fitting that this got a pretty high vote as well. So yeah, maybe in your experience, like do you work closely with HR with the writing job descriptions yourself? How do you go about it?
Yes, so I guess I was going to say we're lucky. I feel lucky in Waters. I have a good. First of all, we have a separation between kind of traditional HR. We have kind of operations HR and kind of strategic or business partner HR, and then alongside that, we also have talent acquisition. And I have a really good relationship with one person of a talent acquisition team, and then also some of their colleagues as well. So that's cool. There's kind of collaboration built in on whatever we're looking at. And I think that would be my first answer to kind of any of these things. And Tomek was kind of talking about that in the answer to the first one. If you feel like there's a gap, like the job descriptions could be better, sit down and work together. And especially with the job description, will definitely be two-way learning there. So a technical team, a development team, they're going to have some things that I think are really important to communicate in that job spec. And we might see a list of a non-technical person's put together and be like, oh, well, why are you mentioning that? Okay, well, let's talk about that. But from the other direction too, somebody in HR, talent acquisition, they're going to have a lot of good skills in putting together a good job spec. They're probably going to have been reading about like what works from a diversity point of view. How do we appeal to men and women? How do we make this feel like it's like an inclusive job description and that people aren't put off by feeling that they need to hit every item that's on the checklist? So my first thing to say would be start off with collaboration in mind and be open to learn in both directions, because HR and talent acquisition are going to be good at writing job specs. And after that, just kind of move towards agreement of like, what do we go, like, what's the strategy with this job spec? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to sell the company? Are we trying to hit like a specific skill set or a specific role or level of experience, and coordinate on moving towards that thing? Because it's not going to help if people are going in different directions. And then I guess the last thing to say would be, if people have felt that this job spec or the previous job spec wasn't that so great, just put something simple in, like a review. Okay, like before you publish it, I'll take a look, and I'll, like a pull request or whatever, give them a chance to review and make adjustments.
Yeah. Working together, I guess, for different elements of the job. Yeah, and company fit and all that sort of stuff where HR can help out. Yeah, thanks, Gavin. Cool, Tomek, anything?
Yeah, I will add, like, just piggybacking on what Gavin said, that basically the big fault from my experience in the defining the job description is unfortunately on the IT side, because developers often like create a wish list of the skills that they would love the candidates to have, and then you realize that that's the list that no one on the earth is meeting the expectations. Like at DevSkiller, we work closely with customers, even in terms of their job description. And often when I'm saying that you shouldn't treat a job description as a wish list, they are saying, no, we are not doing that. And then I'm looking at their like senior Java developer positions, and even me, like having 15 years experience in Java, and saying, sorry, I'm not meeting the expectations you just passed. So here is something that can be done on the HR side by the simple check and asking, okay, how many of our senior developers that we have at the company are meeting these expectations? All of them. They will say, oh, okay, yeah, probably like 10% or something like this. And that's the first check. So if you hear like less than 50, then it needs to be like improved definitely. The second question that should be asked then is, okay, so how many of our current developers were meeting the expectations on the moment when they were hired? Because often the company is using some very specific technological stack, and it's impossible to hire someone with knowledge of this stack. So then we need to say that it's a nice to have skill, but it's not must have, and that's something that you can learn after joining the company, exactly like 80% of our developers did. So that's when there is a huge sin of IT team, and that's something that should be controlled and verified by the HR.
Yeah, and in a competitive market as it is, it's if you're trying to find this absolute gold star of a candidate, you're probably not going to have too much luck for sure. Tomek,
let me add one concrete hint for the exact same thing that Kuba mentioned and Gavin as well. So it's very often that developers just throw away a bunch of TLAs. TLA stands for 3-letter acronym. So we use XML, JSON, blah, 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 blah. And recruiters just put that in the job description. We require, and they put the exact same list of acronyms. And yeah, that's just impossible for anyone to ever fulfill. So the concrete tip is, rather than saying we require and a bunch of technologies, simply say we use and a bunch of technologies. And this gives it like really different signal. You are not requiring a candidate to know all of these, because it's virtually impossible. And I would rather not hire someone who knows that many technologies, because I don't feel that they know them really well. But instead, you are giving a signal to the candidates that, yeah, this is our stack, this is our culture, this is the way we develop. If you kind of agree with that, if you feel like you would like to work in a company that uses that stack, that's great. And how will developer make that choice? The developer sees that list and thinks to himself, okay, so I know like half of these technologies, and the other half is either unknown or that's something I would love to learn. Let's apply. If you simply see requirements, then it's a no-go because you don't know these technologies. And by the way, the same mistake is made by developers. So they put a bunch of acronyms on their CV without really like putting much thought into it, but that's a completely different story.
Yeah, I would just like extend that that there are like different sizes of the technologies. So there are some technologies that we use on a daily basis that you can learn in a few days, and there are some technologies that takes a year to learn. So in this like must-have requirements, I usually prefer specifying, like for example, candidates should know Java or should know Spring Framework, which is like not easy to acquire right now in terms of the knowledge. But some easy libraries or some tools that we use, and you can learn this tool like in 3 hours. Then like saying that without knowledge of this tool, you won't be hired. It's basically stupid.
Yeah, back to the point of must-haves and nice-to-haves, essentially. Yeah. Okay, I might stay with you, Kuba, because we've got the last one here, which was the quality of source candidates. And this is also something we talked about in part 1, where we had a poll asking the audience how involved IT is in sourcing of candidates. And we had it really an entire spread on the spectrum. Some were actively involved. We also had votes for never involved whatsoever, which obviously is a little bit concerning. So if there is a complaint about the quality of the source candidates, what can be done to sort of maybe improve this, particular issue?
Yeah, I believe that we should start with the 2 previous points then, because like first one is that the quality of the candidates is definitely like related with the quality of the job description. So if your job description is a kind of a wish list of like a superstar Yeti developer, because it's not someone who does not exist simply, then like people who are applying, or rather people who have no idea what they are doing and why they are applying to this job, or people who basically believe that they are great. So this wannabe developer. So the first thing is that having a good job description is the first step to have a good quality of the candidate. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the candidates who are sourced needs to be verified, and like expecting that technical or expecting that HR person will like verify the quality of the candidate is basically like a no-go for me. And that's what I believe was a misunderstanding of this like technical knowledge expected from HR. I wouldn't expect HR to do even like a screening call with a candidate, because like asking candidate yes/no question makes totally no sense, and asking questions that have longer answer requires some technical knowledge to be able to understand this answer and ask some additional questions. So that's the first thing, that we need to have another way of verifying the quality of the candidates. And then the sourcing department, basically the more they are able to source, the better. Then we need to have some stage in the recruitment funnel to verify the candidates. It can be like a homework, it can be a recruitment short screening call, it can be use of the tool like DevSkiller to verify the candidates. There are many different solutions, but definitely we shouldn't expect HR people to do that. And last but not least, of course, IT department can do a lot for employer branding around IT. Having people who are speakers on the conferences, people who are involved with community, doing some open source activities, selling the technical stack we use at the company, talking about the solutions, the architecture patterns that we use, how we deliver the software. It's also attracting candidates, because they see, okay, you are using like distributed systems, you are not talking about Scrum, but you are lean company, you are using event sourcing, etc., etc. Like it's a huge cooperation between business and IT. Like developers are involved in the business. They have impact on the business decisions, etc. That's how IT can sell the company. So these are the 3 pillars I would focus on in terms of good quality of the candidates.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Gavin, maybe you'd like to add anything. You mentioned the point about selling, like what are we doing here? Where we're selling the company, and Kuba elaborated this with employer branding and stuff like that. But have you had any sort of success with sourcing over at Waters?
Yeah, sure. I guess both from the IT side and the talent acquisition So our talent acquisition team, they do a bunch of like kind of passive brand awareness. This is who Waters is. This is what we do. Here are some of the interesting and good reasons that you might want to come and work at Waters. And then they'll do specific. They'll join events like STEM outreach, host a recruitment thing, or some kind of technical meetup. So they're doing kind of passive general awareness stuff in the background all the time. And then when it comes to a specific role, they'll go and look. So they'll look on LinkedIn, they'll go to a certain job board. So they're doing targeted looking. And again, there's an important collaboration point there. I've got 3 roles open. I'm most interested in this one. This is the highest priority. Can you focus on that one, please? And they'll go off and spend their time. So we're kind of aligned on priority. Mm-hmm. So a lot of good sourcing from talent acquisition and HR. I think on the IT side, like based on actual experience and things that have worked for us, summer intern programs have been useful. They help you to build a good reputation with a university, a local university. And in some cases, we've hired people who have been on a previous internship. So you're building up awareness there, and you're hitting people who are young in their career. So an opportunity to get them interested in your organization. I think you can, maybe not lots of technical people are interested in it, but you can create awareness on platforms like LinkedIn. Again, as Kuba was saying, Sharon, these are some of the things that we're doing technically. This is the direction we're going in. Here's an example of some team activity or a product launch, and it was good for these reasons. Again, you're just kind of showing why it might be an interesting place to go and work there. And people are interested in products that do good for some reason, or products that they identify or would want to be building themselves. So there's definitely things that can be done there. And probably maybe more likely for technical people would be joining in with things like local meetups. So again, you're kind of building a network outside of the organization. Maybe you present, maybe you go along and you kind of do some chatting with the people who your peers and colleagues in the local area. And in some cases, we host internal meetups. That's not it's not something that we've done a lot of recently, kind of tailed off with COVID, but we're looking to bring that back in.
Yeah, we've heard and discussed this in other panels with even hackathons and stuff like that. To sort of just build awareness and activity.
That's a good point, actually. I think our site in Brasov, they did a kind of public-facing hackathon early end of last year or earlier this year, and that got a lot of interest from people outside the organization.
Yeah. And just building that contact, that touch point, and just that they're aware of the company. It's good to have it as a strategy for sure. Okay, I think we've covered that pretty well, guys. So yeah, really thank you for those answers. Tomek, I'll go over to you. We've kind of heard the perspective of the audience, and this is the assumption from our majority of the HR audience, that this is what irks IT about HR. But from your perspective, what do you believe is the biggest factor that affects the successful or effective cooperation between HR and IT?
Well, so the whole point of this webinar, and actually the name DevRec, is kind of a metaphor of the DevOps movement. So historically, there were developers and operations, and they were sitting in separate rooms, and they were kind of almost enemies to each other. And like, if you are treating HR this way, if these are these weird enemies who don't know how to code, and vice versa, if recruiters treat developers like these guys just sitting like somewhere in the dark room and just eating pizza, and you have no respect to each other, then you will not succeed. And in the most like pathological and toxic situations, I even experienced a situation where in some sense, these two separate groups of people had different objectives. So developers wanted to hire few people, but very skilled, very good, because they'd rather have a smaller team, but a very experienced team. But recruiters and HR people, because they got bonuses, they actually wanted to hire as many people as possible and as quickly as possible. And this naturally created friction because like the objectives were different. And this clearly showed that they are like two different teams and like two different departments, and they don't like see the same goal. So I would say, to answer your question, that the biggest obstacle is when you don't respect each other's work. You have to understand that HR is doing a great work because they have soft skills, because they can do a lot of like the work around you. So they like collecting people, they're helping you with having a great job ad that looks good. They are helping you with branding, with marketing, and so on and so forth. You as a developer are the best person to assess technical skills, obviously. So you need HR and HR needs you. If you see the other side as an enemy, or in the best case scenario as someone who is like not needed because I can do everything myself, you will not succeed. So the biggest problem is that you have to really appreciate each other's work. And in the best case scenario, you are working in the same team. Of course, you are not working 100% of the time in the same team, but if you are meeting together like periodically, if you are sharing your experiences, you feel that these are the same people who have the exact same objectives as you. They want to work in the best organization as possible, then you will succeed. And from my sad experience, the bigger the organization, the harder it is to get this synergy, because like there are different departments with different budgets, with different bonuses, and so on and so forth. So you have to like stay in this scenario even when the company grows larger. You cannot be these individual silos where, just like DevOps, like in the DevOps movement, developers were just throwing out code to operations, and operations had no idea what kind of applications they run because they were like not concerned about that. I see the exact same really poor situation with developers and HR or recruiters. The recruiters are throwing out candidates which are really poorly sourced, and developers are just like throwing out the candidates back with very little feedback, and the recruiters are not learning. So one thing I forgot is the feedback loop. So developers are giving a feedback to recruiters why this candidate was poor, and vice versa. The recruiters are telling the engineers like, we cannot accept this candidate because, well, maybe he is great, I don't know, Python programmer, but he will be a jerk in a team, essentially. So there needs to be this feedback loop, but you won't get feedback loop if there are two silos, if there are two separate individual teams with different objectives. Sorry for talking so much.
Yeah.
I saw you unmuted yourself.
I would also like mention one thing that in my perspective and from my experience is one of the biggest missed opportunity around that is basically when I see that the company have a process where the HR team and the IT team have separate recruitment interviews with a candidate, that's a sign that something can be optimized. Why? Because like asking a candidate about like some soft skills and how the candidate will behave in particular situation is not the same as observing how candidate behaves in this situation in real life. So when you have a joint interview, when there are like, for example, two people from IT and one person from HR, and they're talking with a candidate like on various topics, like about why do you want to change the job? What you would like prefer to do if you're more like a maintenance developer, like a greenfield developer, and then also verifying what happens if the candidate gets like some tough question, or when the candidate is wrong, how candidate like interacts with developers, etc. Because when we are talking about the technical stuff, then we are not observing the reactions. We are focused on the content, not the form that this content is passed to us. And that's the great impact that HR can have on the technical interview when they are focused not on the content, because the content is something that they listen to, but they are focused on the form. So how candidate is acting, what's the body language of the candidate, etc. So that's something that is a huge improvement. And I remember that when we've set up such processes, and when we used to have such a team on the interview, then after each interview, the HR people were able to tell us how this person will act in the team, what will be the problems and what will be the advantages of this person. And what I can say is that from the people that we hired, like 90% of the things they were talking about, like 90 minutes of the interview, were right. So the issues were when they expected them to be, and the advantages or perks of these people were also in the things that were mentioned, and I see them in my notes after the interview. So that's the big opportunity. Is to do together an interview, not like act as two teams that are just passing the candidate through the funnel like a resource. Not a resource, it's a person, and we should be able to observe this person in one time. And also, it's of course great impact on the duration of the recruitment process, because being able to schedule one interview is much easier than two interviews, and having one 90-minute interview is much more informative than having two 1-hour interviews, even if we're spending less time with the candidate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, collaboration, alignment, and respect, I guess, are the three takeaways from that right there. I will move along because we're sort of coming towards the end of the discussion. So I'm going to launch our final poll, but thank you very much, guys, for all of your responses there. And let me just see if it's the right one. Yep, this is the final poll, and it's multi-choice again, so you can vote multiple times. It should appear on your screen right now. And yeah, as we're wrapping up, the question is this: what factors do you think would positively improve HR and IT cooperation at your company? And we have better planning of the recruitment process, more communication, clearer division of responsibilities, mutually sharing knowledge and skills, and having HR and IT both present during each interview. That should say that. I'm not sure that's why it's not on the screen. And I feel like we've kind of touched on those points already with that last response there. And I can see a pretty even spread of answers. Still some votes coming through. Oh, a couple more. Okay. Well, still going. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And yeah, we have a pretty close one here. So we have mutually sharing knowledge and skills with 62%. Having HR and IT both present during each interview is also 50%, but more communication, 42%, 38% for better planning of the recruitment process, and some votes also for clearer division of responsibilities, which, obviously there's many factors that we can sort of work on here to improve the cooperation. But Gavin, I might start with you and sort of trying to tie a bow on this entire topic. Yeah. So in your opinion, what would be the ideal blueprint for an effective tech recruitment process? And what would you say are the critical responsibilities for both HR and IT at each stage of the process?
All right. That's a big question. So yeah. At a high level, I think it's important for the development organization to have kind of a strategy of how they're hiring. So it's going to depend on your organization, how many candidates you get for a typical role. But are you going for specific skills match specific levels? Are you going for kind of future potential? Like, what is your strategy? You need to communicate that to the HR organization, and vice versa as well. Depending on the size of the organization you're in, there might be a hiring philosophy, a compensation philosophy. That HR will have a bunch of information. You want to get kind of on the same page with that early in the process, so that you know what the constraints are and what you're both aiming for. After that, okay, so a blueprint for a perfect process.
Yeah, or more maybe just elaborating on the poll. Like we have obviously quite a wide spread of responses there. So what do you believe, in your opinion, is the is the way forward?
First and foremost, I think you should map out your process. So what's the first step? So the job interview, the job specs out there. We get candidates in some kind of inbox. What's the first step? Who's replying? What does the screen look like? When's the technical assessment coming in? Who's closing? How many steps are there? If that's not clear, you can't review it, and you want to be looking at the candidates. How many you got at each stage in the pipeline? And you need some kind of data or tracking of the process so that you can review it. Do we need the second interview? Is that putting candidates off? Is it telling us anything that we didn't get in the first interview? And as to Cooper's point earlier, having HR and technical people in the same interview, so have your process mapped out so that you and the HR talent acquisition can review that. After that, I would say a lot of it comes down to collaboration. We're lucky at Waters in that, like as I was saying earlier, I work directly with somebody from the talent acquisition team. So I have a weekly stand-up. We look at the open recs. We talk about which one we're struggling with, which ones are going well. Hey, we've got 3 good candidates. We're probably going to offer on these 2. So you're communicating regularly, and you're getting, as you get towards the end of a pipeline, you're preparing for you, because you want to be able to move quickly and offer at the end of the pipeline for communication all through the candidate stages. So have it mapped out, collect data where you can so you can review it and make changes, and collaborate regularly. So if you can get that kind of dev rec movement going and have people that are working closely together and view themselves as working as a team, I think that's a good foundation.
Yeah. Just remembered it's patented, the dev rec, so if anyone starts
responsibilities,
intellectual property of DevSkiller.
I would say IT, they are responsible for the technical assessment. We've covered this. You've got to own that as the development group or the IT group. You are responsible for making good decisions on technical ability. In terms of HR or talent acquisition, I see them as providing like expert input into the process. They're gonna know things that technical people don't about writing job descriptions, what's good from a legal point of view, they'll have organizational context about salary changes or what's happening with headcount generally that your team, your dev team won't know. So they're kind of expert input, and they're really good at sourcing, and they're going to provide soft skill and a different type of assessment. But IT, ultimately, they own the technical assessment.
Yeah. I think we touched on it last week as well, 2 weeks ago when we had the first part of this panel, and that was who owns the process. And you said it right there. There has to be an owner at the end of the day. Thanks very much, Gavin. I know that was a lot to unpack, so I appreciate it. I'm not sure if Kuba or Tomek, you have anything to add here before there is one question in the Q&A, but I'm not sure if anyone has anything else to ask, but fire them in there if you like.
No, I believe that it was like you mentioned most of that, and that's basically a summary of what we've been discussing with these stages, and how to create a good job description, who should verify what, who should control what. It's like talking about the responsibilities.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. Well, yeah, I do see one question here in the Q&A from Dennis, and I'm just going to read it out loud. And if anybody wants to jump onto it, please feel free. And it says, work of IT people is automation. Can you provide a good reason why IT people start their contact with companies from the person whose job can be mostly done automatically? And I don't mean to be kind of offensive to anybody, but
I'm not sure if I understand this question correctly. Like the clue of this question.
Dennis is still with us, so he can provide some clarification here.
But guys, if you understand that, feel free to answer.
Yeah.
It feels like part of that question is, if you have candidates coming into some kind of inbox and they've applied for a job role, could you automate the response, whether it's be some kind of filtering of a response to that person? Maybe it's sending out a technical screen or something. You could automate part of that process. I think that was my interpretation of what the question was. To answer it, that could work if you, in some scenarios, depending on the role, the job description, how many candidates there are, how standardized your response, how standardized your first interaction or your first screening of a candidate is. You could maybe do that, but there's an argument that a more human touch is a better impression for the organization.
Yeah, we discussed this as well. There's a fine line between automation and the human touch. With this was coming from the HR perspective. Obviously, some elements can be automated, but you don't want to go into this process of just completely automating everything, because then you lose the human touch completely. So we hope we answered that one for you, Dennis. Okay, and I've got another question here from Anastasia, which is, if we're outsourcing and we have a slow client, they give us information rarely. How do we keep the developers interested for the job and interview? Tomek, maybe any advice on how to keep candidates interested in the process?
I see Jakub wants to answer that. Or
oh, he's going to answer it.
I just clicked the link to market, but I can answer if you want, just briefly. Like it really depends on the customer, because if the customer is very slow, then it's extremely possible that the candidate will manage to find the other job in this time. And the only thing you can do is to show that this customer is pretty unique, and that will be the great opportunity. Otherwise, I would focus on the people who are not actively looking for a job, but they're working in a company they like. They are open to change the job, but that's not their focus. So then they can spend more time in staying in the current company and then moving to the company after the customer finally make a decision. But I believe you will fail with the candidates who are actively looking for the job.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and one last one, and I'll paraphrase here. Maybe Gavin, you can take it. And basically, it's asking for tips on how to make messages attractive to candidates. Do you have any advice here? I mean, it helps if you've got a good job, I guess, to offer in the first place. But
yeah, like if you have a good company and a product that people are going to work on, and you're off to a great start there. I guess think about what is appealing to technical people. So we know that they're interested in technical challenges. They're probably interested in like some part of technology, so whether it's current languages or current approaches. And I think at some level, everybody wants to work on a product for a company that matters. So try and pull those things out and combine something interesting about the role of a team, of a company, and something interesting about the technology. What, like the options they got, how are they going to grow? How are they going to contribute?
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Well, that is time, I guess, because I can hear the church bells tolling across the road from my house, which means we're right on the hour mark. So, and the window's closed, so I don't think you can hear it. But yeah, I'd like to say a really big thank you to the three of you, Tomek, Kuba, and Gavin, for taking the time to share your insights. I hope it was useful for you guys in the audience. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar today, you will be receiving that post-webinar survey in about 5 minutes. And we'll also send you the recording link in a couple of hours. And one final thing is part 3 of this webinar series, which is the final component, where we're going to have HR representatives and IT representatives sitting on the same panel, basically, in 2 weeks' time. So keep an eye out on your inbox for an invitation to that if you want to join us. Other than that, one last time, thanks very much for joining us, and thank you guys again for taking the time, and yeah, see you all soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.